elementary school, I remember there was a day when everybody got to bring their favorite snack for the entire class to share. I'm sure you can imagine everybody's shock when I walked in with 3 jumbo bags of shrimp-flavored crackers that I had begged my mom to go buy at H Mart the weekend before. I can still hear everybody's ews and I can't believe you eat those as I sat at my desk and scarfed down a Pop-Tart when all I really wanted to eat was my shrimp-flavored crackers. I was the only Asian person in my entire elementary school, besides my mom, who was a teacher there. I didn't really realize how odd this was until I got to a more diverse middle school and actually had somebody who looked like me in my class. Or rather, just somebody who didn't look like everybody else. I can still remember sitting with one of my friends in middle school and them pulling out their own bag of shrimp-flavored crackers. From that point onwards, I realized I was a better version of myself when surrounded with diversity. Flash forward, I am now a third-year computer science major at Georgia Tech, and I am passionate about restructuring and creating organizations that treat diversity, equity, and inclusion as core values. The reason why I believe focusing on organizations is so pivotal to this movement is because they serve as a main form of social life, especially for college students. People join these teams to gain a sense of community and end up dedicating significant time and effort to their causes. I just want to start with some basic questions. How many of you are in an organization? How many of you believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion should be important values of that organization? I hope that by the end of this talk, I'm able to share my story and experiences and provide the tools to equip us all to go back to our organizations and ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion are at their core. I want to acknowledge that diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI as it is commonly referred to, has become somewhat of a buzzword recently. Although I do think acknowledgement and awareness is a step in the right direction, there needs to be actions behind those words in order for DEI to actually mean something and have a positive impact. As a woman of color in a national Panhellenic sorority, I know what it feels like to be tokenized and unappreciated, and I have felt anger. Anger that sororities still post photos of only white sisters. Anger that people still wear culturally inappropriate costumes to social events. And anger that nobody seems to care but me. As someone who thrives in diverse communities, I knew that I needed to direct this anger towards creating a safe conversation-inducing space where other people of color could bring to light what it is like being a minority in a Greek organization. So this summer, I started a campaign on my Instagram called Spearheading Change in Greek Life. I had 2 main goals. The first was to celebrate and elevate people of color's experiences being involved in a fraternity or sorority. The second was to bring awareness to the lack of people of color involved in Greek life and focus on ways that we could change the system and change the structures of these fraternities and sororities. It's important to note that when I refer to the lack of people of color involved in Greek life, I am not referring to the Multicultural Greek Council or the National Panhellenic Greek Council. These are councils specifically created for people of color, as the Multicultural Greek chapters focus on specific ethnicities and or cultures, and the National Panhellenic chapters are historically African American. Thinking back to this summer and the impact this campaign had on Georgia Tech Greek life, I can confidently say that there were 3 phases of the campaign that I believe led to its overall success. The first was creating a safe, conversation-inducing space where other people of color could share their experiences, which directly fulfilled my first goal of elevating and celebrating minority voices. As I said before, my first Instagram post was purely out of my own anger, and I honestly didn't know if anybody else felt the way that I did. But after that first post, I received so many comments like, "This happened to me," and Thank you so much for being a voice for us all. That I knew I needed to take the campaign a step further and redirect its focus towards the community's grievances rather than just my own. So to do this, I created an anonymous Google form where any Greek member of any school could share their experiences and/or their suggestions. There were two reasons for this. First, I knew that the lack of people of color involved in Greek life is not just a Georgia Tech Greek life thing. This is a widespread issue across all college campuses, and I knew that we could all learn something from one another. Secondly, I didn't want this just to be for people of color because I knew it would take everybody and the entire community for us to make some real impact. The responses and conversations resulting from this Google form are what became the next 3 posts of the Instagram campaign and are the tools I used when I met with individual chapters and executive boards about what their members wanted to see change. Many of the responses involved more partnership with Black communities at Tech, mandated implicit bias training, and a communal focus on making Greek life a safe space for people of color to join. After creating all these changes and thinking of this list, I knew that I would next have to determine the necessary structural changes to make all of these suggestions a reality. I knew from my experiences being involved in Greek life that there was something structurally wrong with the way it operates, and many of those issues, I believe, stem from the National Panhellenic Rush process. For those of you who have never gone through Rush, or maybe just don't know a lot about it, I'll give you a breakdown. You visit a certain amount of houses every day, and you spend a certain amount of time in each house. The way that sorority breaks up the time you spend there is totally up to them, but the goal of every day is to get to know the potential new member better to see if she would be a good fit in your chapter. Seems logical, and I definitely had some meaningful conversations with girls at every house. Although my rush process was successful, as in I ended up at my top choice, there was just one thing I wasn't quite prepared for walking into all those houses: the sheer whiteness. Being a woman of color in a house full of white women who I was supposed to be impressing felt wrong, and I was anxious about my joining, to say the least. But I still did it, and a year later, here I was rushing potential new members and finally learning all the practices and the secrets. To say I was disappointed is an understatement. I was furious, and I was so confused by the practices sororities across the nation still use to handpick girls. It felt like many of these practices were kept just to keep the sorority white, one example of this being legacy status. Being a legacy means that somebody in your family was in a specific sorority, so you have legacy status for that chapter of that sorority at the school you're rushing at. In principle, this seems like a really good way to keep younger generations of a family connected to older generations. However, Greek life is expensive, and it always has been. And from its onset on college campuses, there was only really one group of people that could afford to join: white men and white women. So essentially, all legacy status does is place white women higher on a bid list, minimizing the ability for women of color, who are rarely legacies, to join that sorority. I also wanted to focus on creating relationships with the Multicultural Greek Council and the National Panhellenic Greek Council. If I wanted to make Greek life a more diverse, equal, and inclusive space, then I needed to go to the Greek sector that was specifically created to do that. One thing that I knew would result from these relationships was education. MGC and MPHC have more cultural traditions, and I knew that creating these opportunities for the Greek community to learn about their history and celebrate their culture with them, that maybe we could see where we were lacking in diversity ourselves. So after creating the list of all these changes, I knew that the next phase would be finally vocalizing all of them with leadership. Within 4 days of my first Instagram post, I had meetings lined up with Georgia Tech Student Government Association, every Greek Council's executive boards, and I was presenting at a meeting for all the Greek presidents. This was a total of 45 groups on campus. I was amazed. This was a direct result of the entire community coming to repost, share, and call for long overdue changes. I came to these meetings with an agenda. I wanted to be stern and emphasize that we didn't want these meetings to be performative, rather express that we were holding them accountable on instilling all of these changes. Some of the changes that I brought up was mandated implicit bias training, which actually ended up happening for all of the National Panhellenic Women's chapters as women, reducing the price of Rush, and organizing events where all 4 Greek councils could attend and get to know one another. I was also able to be part of the relaunch of GUIDE, which stands for Greeks United for Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity. We are a cross-council organization that focuses on giving our campus tools on how to make our Greek community a more diverse, equal, and inclusive one. I want to emphasize that all of these changes and all of these meetings was a result of communal work. Members sharing their experiences and conversing with me and trusting me is what led to its overall success. I know that my work regarding DEI is targeted at the Greek community, but it's important to note that I think that this movement is pivotal to all organizations. I want you to think back to the beginning of this talk when I asked you if you were in an organization. Now imagine every single person involved in that organization in a room with a conference table in the center. Is there a demographic missing? Is everybody at the table being heard equally? Is everybody even at the table, or are there still people floating in the back? I think this visualization depicts the work that needs to be done in all of our group-based work, and I don't just mean our extracurricular organizations. Outside of all the organizations I'm currently involved with, I make sure to ask any company I interview with what their company does to actively ensure DEI efforts are occurring. For me, this is a very important question because as somebody who thrives in diverse communities, I would never want to be the only person that looks like me in that conference room. And DEI is something that I will always seek in any group-based work I do in the future. So why the collective effort? I'm sure I've emphasized by now how important it was for the entire Greek community to rise up, and I've talked about how each phase relied on the people. The first relied on people coming together and sharing their experiences. The second relied on people brainstorming and collaborating. And the third relied on people listening and taking action. It took the entire Greek community coming together to think of not only the problems, but the potential solutions to the unfair practices and the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of our chapters. I believe that the utilization of these 3 phases would assist any organization who is beginning their journey on towards creating an environment that highlights DEI principles. Helen Keller once said, "Alone we do so little, together we can do so much." I encourage you to keep this quote in your focus because instilling this togetherness she calls for is what will not only create a culture shift within our organizations, but within our society as a whole. Thank you.